My name is Jason Wilson. It's second time here at RuhrJS, going just as well as the first time. So, wanted to give a quick talk that kind of ties in with some of the things we've seen this morning. So these slides were thrown together, 15, 20 minutes ago, something like that. But I wanted to talk about things that we, as developers, sometimes consider burdens, which are actually very helpful things, very useful things to have around if we do them right. So, moving on. This is me from a future career, or previous career, not future, prior career. I'm still learning a second language. It's brain confusing. And this ties in because my thing is I tend to give talks in the form of C stories or relating to C stories. I started developing in 2005. By 2009, I was burnt out and working too close to ships and other people that worked on the water, so I went and worked on ships for about 7 years. When I came back, the industry had moved on from hand coding JavaScript and HTML and TextMate to test-driven design and all these other tools and aids and frameworks that we have now. And it helped me realize a lot of the things that I had learned and experienced in my career were kind of based around human factors, human performance, and it gives me a lot of kind of more concrete examples, for me anyway, than looking at like abstract test examples and figuring out, okay, what's the benefit of this? So, this was my office for 2 years straight, actually alternating between small ones, big ones. This is the Fairweather. She is a hydrographic survey ship in the U.S. We would go all around the waters of Alaska, collecting sonar data and building maps. I was one of the ship's officers, so typically I was up on the bridge, navigating, reading charts, things like that, not touching mechanical things. The guys in the engineering department were very happy to not have us touch mechanical things. For the same reason, usually, that your back-end folks aren't happy to have the front-end folks touching the back-end. Very complicated things. Things like this. Dials all over the place. I don't know who that guy is, so he got one of my icons for a face. The only things that I understand immediately from looking at this control panel are electricity, don't touch, you'll die, and the exit's that way. I don't know what any of those gauges mean. I don't know what any of the buttons or the status indicators mean. And that was actually a problem, because the way that we would work, underway, obviously the engineers are down in the engine room, they're watching everything, they're making sure nothing breaks. When we would get to a port for the weekend, they would all go into town. Small Alaskan towns, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, usually have a bar and houses. So that we knew what they were doing. They weren't going to be reliable if we called them 2 hours, into their shore leave. So we would have to go either, me as a deck officer or maybe my watchstander would go every half hour just down into the engine room. Most of the things were shut off, relatively harmless. But we'd have to go through and say, okay, yeah, everything's okay. Which again, I don't know what any of this means. So everything was usually always okay, except for the one time that we found like water coming in from the outside, so that was obviously not okay. But there's things that you can do about this. So if I ask anybody, is that a good reading? Nobody knows. If I hand you the manual, maybe you can look it up and figure it out, but you have to check 15 of those on your quick 5-minute walkthrough because you have to go look at everything else on the ship every half hour. So it's not practical. Something I learned later on from human factors, and I tried to talk them into maybe implementing this a little bit, is that if I just simply add colored bars, there we go. That's okay. I don't know if it's supposed to be 174, but it's in the green. We're good. Nothing's going to explode, right? Even better for the colorblind folks, right? Pretty clear message. That should probably be call somebody, but it's, so thinking about what we do then. One of the times when I was talking to one of the more senior engineers about, why don't we do things like this? Why don't we have, things set up so that, if me or, the least technical person on the ship walks through the engine room and, something's got like a runaway pressure going on and is about to, completely ruin our day or week, depending on how far away from shore we are, they can just glance at it and be like, oh, I should probably go tell somebody about that. We need the runaway bars. And their response at the time, and this it was not the best example of the engineers in the fleet, to be honest. We had great engineers. They were really helpful. But his response was, well, we don't want you guys down there touching stuff anyway. So it's like, okay, we'll all just sink because, at least I'm not fiddling with levers. But this goes into a lot of the things we do. Front end doesn't always understand what the back end's doing. We have tools that can help with that. We can use type systems so that if they're building their piece and I'm building my piece, we at least know that at the end of the day they're going to talk together. And then if we change one of them, we're going to know one of us is wrong. It's probably going to be the front end. We get that reputation, right? We get their CSS and their JavaScript. Test-driven design. A good example here recently, we had one of our analytics team came up with a plan. They said, look, we have times where code changes will break analytics, and then we get drops in data, and we really can't track trends or anything. Here's Gherkin that we found, and we can write basically unit tests. They're just sentences. And then those will test the code, and we understand them and you understand them. And we kind of looked at it, and then it became clear that they didn't really want to write the tests. So we looked at what Gherkin was and basically said, like, okay, well, if the developer's going to have to do it anyway, we'll just use regular unit tests because the developers can read those. But then kind of thinking about it later, and for those of you that don't know what a Gherkin or a Cucumber is, it's basically taking, Gregor's test example, and instead of the test file containing that code, describes it, all of that, it would basically say, when I have a sentence, and that sentence is longer than 0, and maybe my uppercase function is available, then I should see this result. And it's written out like that. It's a sentence. They use when, then, if, and there's code behind that. You still have to write the same jest testing or whatever framework you're using. But now suddenly your tests are readable. Anyone on your team can go in and look at this. And we had kind of cast that off as a burden. But really, when you think about when new developers come in, I keep hearing, and I'm in the midst of this right now because I'm in a whole new code base and I don't know what I'm doing. I keep hearing the statistic, it takes 6 months before you're comfortable with a new code base. So if you think about that, and I would think for newer developers, it's probably a longer time than 6 months. That's a whole lot of lost productivity because someone's just trying to figure out how to read through all of your abstractions or all of your test code, what have you. So I think a lot of times it's like the colored bars and the labels here on the gauge. We have simple things, we have tools, we have maybe a little bit of extra work that we can do to make it easier for everybody, from the starting developer up through the senior who's maybe just having an off day and doesn't realize that it says runaway. And I think we need to kind of shift our focus and start looking at these things as the time savers that they are, as the safeguards that they are. Someone can't come in and just wreck your code base because their hand is held. There's things that show them the way. And I think I'm out of time, so just things to consider. What may be clear to you as a developer, as an engineer, as even a QA, may not be clear to other people on your team, and it's probably for the better if they actually do understand when something goes wrong.